Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. This week marks 15 years of FSG ownership at Liverpool. In that time, they have won 2 Premier Leagues and also a Champions League as well. So how did Liverpool become a modern superclub? With us today, we have Matt Slater. Matt, appreciate you joining us. And also, we've got Simon Hughes as well. Simon, let's get straight into this. 15 years of FSG ownership at Anfield. It's been quite a ride, hasn't it?
Yeah, I can remember the day they took over. It came at the end of a very stressful period for the club. And it's a very different club now. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
And also part of the podcast, former Liverpool CEO Peter Moore has been talking to you, Matt, ahead of recording. Well, let's hear what he had to say on who Fenway Sports Group are and also what makes them so successful.
Most people know John Henry, Tom Werner, Mike Gordon, who was my boss. But FSG, Fenway Sports Group, is a broad group of local old Boston money, I'll call it. Jimmy Iovine, LeBron James are minority owners within there. So you've got a group in FSG that is very familiar with running sports teams at the highest level, Boston Red Sox being the obvious. You think Liverpool were having a tough time. Boston Red Sox have not won the World Series in 84 years. When I joined in 2017, investment needed to be made in the stadium, investment needed to be made in the squad, all operating, and this is very important to them, in a way that operates within the parameters of whether it's the Premier League or UEFA, what was known as financial fair play, now PSR. And they were students of how to do that in very simple terms, building revenue, growing the revenue base, and the stadium investment in the new main stand, and more recently Anfield Road is Exhibit A in that.
A lot of what you said in your answer, I must admit, I hear all the time about US sports owners, right? And there's so many of them in the Premier League, Wes Edens and the Glazers and Todd Bowley. They all have successful franchises back home that have won things. Not all of them, but most of them. But I just think there is something special about FSG, because you're right, they have turned round 2 sleeping giants and they lent into their history and their local fan base, but at the same time had this, we've got to be bigger than our city, we've got to be bigger than Boston, we've got to be bigger than Liverpool. Is there something about the kind of the skill sets of the people in the group, or are they just really good?
One of the things that when I got there, that one of the challenges we had was, look, a massively powerful football club that was underperforming, underachieving. Obviously, we brought Jurgen in, was the embracing of our local history, but we're a global football club. It may sound weird. That was a little bit of a problem at times with the local fan base. And so we developed, and I came up with an expression, local heart, global pulse. That's who we are. So we embraced our global fan base and made sure we could figure out how to, and I hate to say this word, monetize the entire global fan base, to engage them. And also, I think, to the point, when Hicks and Gillette owned the club, there was a shovel going in the ground in Stanley Park in 60 days or whatever it was to build a new stadium. And John Henry, when John and New England Sports Ventures, as they were known then, came in, and John walked into Anfield, as he did with Fenway Park. And I remember this, I was living in Boston during that period, and said, why would we ever want to move? He took on repurposing Anfield, as he does with Fenway Park. You've got to get every dollar, pound, euro out of that stadium. And that's what they have done. It was very simple. It was the virtuous cycle of football. Let's win games. Bigger sponsors will come in, which they did. They'll pay us more money. We'll use that money to buy better players. Better players will win more games. It's the virtuous cycle of football.
Yeah, Simon, Peter has spoken a good game there on how FSG, I guess, have restored 2 huge clubs in Boston Red Sox one, and obviously Liverpool Football Club as well. How big a task did you think they had on their hands when they took over the club in 2010?
Well, they inherited what can only be described as a civil war situation between 2 owners that weren't really communicating with one another, certainly weren't working together. The fan base, I wouldn't say it was totally united against the owners, because there was factions within the fan base as well. But Liverpool, both on and off the pitch, were a total mess. And if you just look at it, objectively, the stadium is much smaller than it is now. Two of the sides have since been redeveloped. And then on the pitch, just looking back there, after the first game, it was the Merseyside derby against Everton. Liverpool was second to bottom in the league after 8 games, which was, even after 8 games, that was a position that Liverpool weren't used to being in. So it was a very poor side that they inherited as well, which required a lot of work. Liverpool realistically couldn't have been any further away from where they are now, certainly in a sporting sense.
Well, Matt, on-pitch success is super key, but for owners, I guess their legacies lie more in the infrastructure and also guardianship of a club as well. Anfield is a good representation of this, taking an iconic ground, keeping its soul, but transforming it as well to maximise revenue potential.
Yeah, I don't have Simon's credentials as a real expert on Liverpool and all things Scouse, but just as an observer from the outside, that I've been to games at Anfield, over quite a long span of time. I think what they've done there is really, really impressive. And just for people that might have forgotten, it's a traditional old ground. And Liverpool were, talking about a potential move or, knocking it down, starting again type sort of ideas back in 2000. This goes back a long way. They started buying up houses in all the streets. It's very much hemmed in. It's very, as I said, very traditional English-style football ground. And they started buying up houses on these rows of terrace streets, I think in about 2001, 2002. The plan they alighted on, the previous owners, Hicks and Gillette, was to basically build a massive stadium in Stanley Park. And I think everyone, or not everyone, but many people will be aware that Stanley Park is this big expanse of green land that separates Liverpool and Everton. Big open space. And they were going to basically build a US-style spaceship stadium in Stanley Park. I can't remember, 60,000, Simon, was that about right? And it just kind of looked like the Allianz in Bayern, or it looked very generic at the time, and that was the plan. It was almost like Anfield. Decisions had been made. It was too old-fashioned. It was done. Now, Hicks and Gillette blew up for umpteen different reasons. The big economic crash in 2008 didn't help them. And as Simon has already said, there was basically a civil war ongoing, and Liverpool were a mess on and off the pitch. I just think it's really, really interesting that Fenway Sports Group, there's a clue in the name, Fenway, the home of Boston Red Sox, the club they bought, I think in 2003 or 4, another old traditional sleeping giant of a club with a very famous ground, very famous Fenway Park, a bit small, very old-fashioned, hemmed in, ripe for redevelopment, probably worth a lot more as housing. The same group of people came to the same decision in both cities. Do you know what? What we've got is so powerful as our brand, as the message we want to project. We have a famous old ground full of quirks. Fenway Park is the quirkiest stadium in American sport, beyond baseball. It's one of the smallest, I think, in baseball. Asymmetric shape, famous green monster wall. There's just really weird bits about it, and yet it's buzzing. It is so Boston Red Sox. It's so Boston. It is a symbol of the city. And I think they just came to the same decision in Liverpool and Anfield. They looked at it and went, do you know what? This is it. Let's stay here. Let's make this better. And all the reasons not to improve Anfield that previous owners had gone, I can't do that. We've got all these problems with the housing behind and the transport and the links, and now it's a nightmare. They just got it done.
There's a famous story about when FSG bought the club, or New England Sports Ventures as they were known at the very beginning, of course, where John Henry, the principal owner, is walking around Anfield, I think on his pretty much his first visit as the owner. And, the lights are on, it's night time, and he's looking around and he says, how can we give up this place. Bear in mind, it was empty at that point. I mean, I don't know how how true that is, but it's a story that's gone around a fair few times. And I do think that was probably the most important decision, because as new owners, people are going to watch for what changes and how they drive that change. By staying at Anfield, that sense of familiarity was there. But I think the importance of Anfield, it cannot be overstated. I mean, I understand, fans of other clubs who get tired of listening to the stories about the famous nights and the atmosphere, because sometimes the atmosphere at Anfield isn't great. It's sort of dependent on the occasion. But I do think that Anfield became an active participant in Liverpool's success. It's almost an identity in itself, and that's because of the words of Bill Shankly, really. So I think had they given up that, they would have lost an awful lot, and in the rough times would have found it harder. But people still feel that sense of place when they go. It still feels like Anfield, despite all the changes now, 15 years later. It's a very modern ground now. I disagree with some of the things that Matt said in the sense of, the surrounding areas are tidier, but it doesn't necessarily mean that working people in the area are finding it easier because of Liverpool's decision to stay. There's still problems that are not all caused by Liverpool, but some of them are a consequence of Liverpool's presence being there. Liverpool will often say, that they've got lots of campaigns working, or a couple of campaigns working with the local community, but there's still this sort of strange coexistence, really, in what is one of the poorest districts in the UK. And I always think that there is more that Liverpool can do to try and solve some of those problems, or ease some of those problems that people live with. But there was no doubt, certainly back in 2010, there was a sense of doom around Anfield for all sorts of different reasons. Whether it was the team was doing badly, the district was really doing badly. A lot of houses were just left because Liverpool didn't have the capacity to expand. They didn't have the money to do it. And I think FSG have given that idea of permanence now. And when you know that something's going to stay there and nothing's going to change, it does give the possibility of reacting accordingly to that.
Like any major organisation, FSG haven't always got things right, whether it's wanting to raise ticket prices, trying to trademark Liverpool, but let's not also forget, try to help form the European Super League. Peter Moore was CEO during the trademark issue, as well as when the club planned to furlough staff during the outbreak of COVID-19. Here he is on the challenges he faced at Liverpool.
The trademark issue and furlough was on my watch, and was very much situations that we felt we were doing the right thing, and pretty quickly realized that the Liverpool fan base is somewhat unique in its volatility and its demands that you do things the way they want them to, and rightly so. For me, it was trademarking Liverpool in a football context. I was at the epicenter of that. I believed in it. We were losing a lot of money through counterfeit product as we were becoming more successful. And our lawyers there at the club said, we've got to get a grip on this, because other clubs have managed successfully to trademark their city name, or it's something that is a tool that you can as you're trying to grow your revenue. But in the end, after a lot of discussion and a lot of debate, the trademarks office here in the UK said, look, Liverpool is too big a city and is too well known on an international level for you to have that control. And we agreed with it and obviously stepped down. But the trademark thing was, I think, indicative of Liverpool. And I'm a Liverpudlian and I totally get it. But what we were trying to do was protect the football club from primarily offshore counterfeiters who were taking full advantage of merchandise that just put Liverpool and a football on there, and off they went, and taking full advantage of the brand that we had built. But yeah, that was something that we learned a lesson from. Furlough was interesting. And it's interesting right now as the US government has furloughed every single federal employee. Being American, I totally understood furlough, because it was something, unfortunately, that happened a lot, not a lot, but every few years, the government couldn't get its budget right. And so they furloughed their workers, which meant don't work, and we'll let you know when everything's fixed and come on back. And I must admit, that was the way that I saw it. We had taken advantage, and I think that was the issue, of government support to get us through this. We had 800 employees and 2,500 casual employees. We needed to take care of them. The club was willing to pay 80% of that and then take 20% from the federal support the national support to make them whole for 100. But that did not go down well. And we were not the only other club. But
no, I know.
I can tell you, Matt, that the other clubs put us out front and center, then ducked for cover when they saw our hat.
That's a fair comment. And as far as you know, because there is concern, not focused on Liverpool, but on the sort of bigger picture of American ownership in the Premier League, we're getting very close to 14, where, two-thirds majority, two-thirds, that there's going to be some moment where these people who have previously been very reasonable and said all the right things are suddenly going to go, yeah, we were kidding. Right, it's the NFL tomorrow. Here we go.
I think there's no embedded sleeper cells of a cohort of Americans that are going to emerge here. I think they all understand now. They're now seasoned veterans, the Stan Kroenkes, the Todd Bowleys, the John Henrys, the Glazers. They're all battered and bloodied in all different ways. And I think that they realize the power of the Premier League. I think they've been through too many battles and the continued growth of the Premier League on a global scale. The bigger concerns are what do you do to further globalize? Is there a 39th game or something outside of the UK? And I'm not sure that will happen anytime soon. But no, I think that everybody understands the world in which they now live and financially operate is a pretty solid world in relation to sports just about anywhere else.
Yes, Simon, Peter just discussed the trademark issue in 2019, which came after plans to raise ticket prices. I mean, you've spoken about that sort of slight jar between the locality and this major club in the middle of it. How problematic was that for local supporters?
Well, I think it eroded trust, because you got to remember the context of the period as well. Liverpool had just won the Champions League, and they've been in positions like this before. So the ticket walkout in 2016 came just after they built the new main stands. And understandably, I guess, the club wants to drive the revenues that it feels that it can. And the ticket situation was just a farce, really, because the amount of money that Liverpool stood to earn from that was minimal, but the sort of the reputational damage was significant, and it set the conversation back with FSG quite a period of time, I think. Obviously, Liverpool had just won the Champions League again, so in 2019, and it sort of felt like they were trying to sneak this decision through the back door when the guards were down and everybody was really happy. Now, yes, Liverpool have got to capitalise on the interest and the success, we get that, but, there's a real sense in Liverpool that Liverpool Football Club has played a huge part in the modern history of the city. But the city has a much, much deeper history than just Liverpool Football Club. There has to be this coexistence. And, there was certainly a sense locally that people felt like, well, Liverpool can't decide who uses this, the name of the city. Surely they shouldn't be able to monopolise that. Now, I sense that Liverpool felt, well, we're one of the biggest employers of the city. We're one of the we are arguably the biggest multinational company in the city. We should be able to benefit primarily from our own branding, but it's a big economic driver. I understand that. But as I say, Liverpool has an identity in itself, which the club benefits from as well. The Liverpool Football Club benefits from the history and the identity of Liverpool as a city. So it just seemed like that Liverpool is a very delicate ecosystem, and it only takes something. This was quite significant, but it doesn't take very much to upset the balance. And it was one of those occasions which did upset the balance. And there was a significant reputational damage for Liverpool as a result of a decision that felt a bit gung-ho. I think they totally misjudged the mood and sort of the attention spans of curious fans who are watching absolutely everything the club is trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, this is sometimes the danger of ownership that comes from beyond, Matt. And I'm just thinking about, the Glazers at Manchester United, the Kroenkes at Arsenal. What do you make of sort of some of those cultural tensions we see, especially with some of these American owners?
Yeah, I don't want to pick on American owners too much. I mean, because loads of Brits get it wrong. Yeah, I wouldn't really have a job if that was otherwise.
Yeah,
I think it's a fair point to make, though, that it can be quite hard to manage any business doesn't matter what it is, if you haven't got boots on the ground, if you don't really understand your audience, don't really understand your customers, don't really understand the culture of the place you work, it could be lots of things, right? We could be talking about, I don't know, where Japan kind of built the Nissan plant in Sunderland, what have you, or some of the other big sort of external investments we've had in this country. The ones that have gone well tended to have gone well because they trusted local management, because they really sort of embraced the place. And I think if I'm looking at Fenway and Liverpool, they've been mistakes, they've been missteps for sure. They've got better. When they have made mistakes, they've tended to correct them quite quickly, and sort of there has been kind of public mea culpas. I mean, the European Super League one is one I really remember, where John W. Henry sort of did that strange, slightly hostage-style video, but he was one of the few that did one. There's been a few other bits and bobs. I remember there was an early one, wasn't there, Simon, around ticket pricing? Was it the £77 ticket that they quickly reversed? That was again, a very American thing to do. Hey, we're selling out. What's the first thing you do? Raise the prices? No, that's not going to really kind of work here in the UK. It's a bit more complicated than back home. But they worked it out, and I do know that I think things have got easier and better for them because some of their bright young things in the company have come to live and work in Liverpool, and that is where things have got better. It hasn't been managed from 3,000 miles away. And of course there are comparisons you can make. I mean, the obvious one, look, the Glazers are always going to come up in any conversation about this, right? And it's very pertinent with Liverpool because Manchester United and Liverpool are always compared. I think Hicks and Gillette is probably even a better comparison because they were the predecessors to Fenway Sports Group, and we saw what they did with Liverpool. It started off making all the right noises, didn't last long for it to unravel. Okay, I've already mentioned in my first little bit about the external shock of the 2008 financial crash, but things were going wrong for those two before that and would have gone wrong anyway because they were just a strange partnership. And you mentioned Arsenal. I think that's I don't think I really want to pick on the Cronkies on that one because the main stick you hit with him is two, really. It's silent Stan. He doesn't communicate enough. Well, I can think of loads of British, Chinese, French, whatever, Greek owners that don't communicate. Maybe not the Greeks, but you know what I mean. Loads of owners from lots of other countries don't communicate very well with their fan base and not winning enough. Well, winning stuff's hard, and Arsenal have been pretty close and they're pretty good. It's sort of 3-4 years now of being there or thereabouts. Is that all the Cronkies' fault? I don't know. I'm not an Arsenal fan, Ayo. I'll leave that one to you. I just think Fenway Sports Group, compared to their predecessor and compared to the Glazers, night and day.
Whilst there's been an aspect of learning on the job, a key element to FSG's success was the appointment of Jurgen Klopp. For the final time, here's Peter Moore on the importance of the German who won the Premier League and also took the club to 2 Champions League finals during Moore's time in charge.
From the perspective of being the CEO, we went to Kiev, disappointment there, but you could just sense we were ready to go back again next year to Madrid, and we're successful there. So yes, and I saw that, and I attended every single game during my tenure there. And so I saw the Klopp effect, if you will, firsthand, of embracing, what Liverpool Football Club was all about. Directing that in the right way, the fans, the stadium, the squad, the ownership group, the staff, and making sure we all understood what the North Star was, which was not only to get back as Premier League champions or to be our first Premier League championship, but also to get back as what we call in Liverpool European royalty, and ultimately get back on our perch, as has been famously talked about. And I think that all of that happened by a very clear focus and support of Fenway Sports Group, Mike Gordon in particular with Jurgen, tremendous relationship, understanding the business and the emotion. Jurgen, an incredibly unique individual, one of the best man managers. And I often talk about this in my business life of if Jurgen wasn't a football manager, he'd easily be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company where the skill sets that he had of leading, understanding the end goal, motivating, challenging the employees, getting the best out of everybody in business, same as in football. And that's what Jurgen had. And so I think FSG, when it clearly wasn't working with Brendan Rodgers, knew that they needed to find a manager that could embrace and corral everything that was good and great about Liverpool Football Club, march it in the direction of that, what we call Biggie, is that European trophy, and build a squad and a backbone through an organizational structure of Michael Edwards, his recruiting staff, Billy Hogan doing brilliantly as chief commercial officer, and get us all marching in the same direction towards success. And that we did. And then, as we famously would say, we were champions of everything and everywhere in that season, where it was Premier League, it was Champions League, it was FIFA Club World Cup. And those were heady times, Matt, and hopefully be soon repeated.
Yeah, I mean, Peter is quick to give credit to the whole structure, Simon, but can we give Jurgen Klopp some flowers, please? Because has Jurgen Klopp been the single most important hire in their tenure in terms of bringing the whole club, the fans, together?
When the owners aren't present, as FSG aren't, they're based in Massachusetts, they do rely on their appointments on the ground, and no appointment is more important than the position of manager, particularly at Liverpool, a club or a club where the managerial position is revered. It inherits all sorts of responsibilities, and not just related to football. There's a social responsibility. It's a civic responsibility, really. You're manager of Liverpool, so getting Jurgen Klopp as manager, people can respect a structure, but they won't be inspired by a structure. They get inspired by a person, and Jurgen Klopp was an inspiring figure. So when he was appointed, as soon as he came in, I just remember everybody was talking about Liverpool differently straight away. And yes, he's required patience over over quite a long period of time, relatively. But I think that the really great thing that Klopp did was every season in the build up to Liverpool becoming what they became from sort of 2019 onwards, he made the last game of the season matter. So there was always something hanging off the last game of the season, whether it was a cup final or qualification for a Champions League or another Champions League final. So I could understand why there was quite a lot of noise externally about, is he going to get it right? But he did. He made it exciting again, for a lot of people. So I think, yes, the structure was obviously really good and supportive of Klopp as well. I think it's important to stress that, because I'm sure Ian might have some different things to say, or some more to say about this than me. But as that structure dismantled, I think it weakened Klopp's position, later on. But yeah, I think Liverpool's a football club where certainly the fan base responds to pretty strong leadership from the manager. And that he was the figure that Liverpool needed when he came in, I think.
Well, joining us now, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome Liverpool's former Director of Research, Dr. Ian Graham, who joined in 2012 and then left in 2023. Ian, so good to have you with us. Look, your work was mainly within the recruitment team at Liverpool. But before we focus on transfers, let's get into how important data was in decision-making in particular, even in the appointment of someone, as Simon mentioned, like Jurgen Klopp.
Our owners, Fenway, I say our owners, I'm still a fan of the club. Liverpool's owners, Fenway, they believed in having evidence behind their decisions. Measuring a manager's much more difficult than measuring a player or measuring a team, but we did our best with the data we had at the time to measure Jurgen, and it was a reasonably easy thing to say that he's a great coach. We think he'll be great for Liverpool. Has so many things going in his favour. Not just the success at Dortmund. They were kind of a challenger club, as Liverpool were at the time. Financially couldn't compete with Bayern Munich in the same way that Liverpool couldn't compete at the time with City or Manchester United. And then importantly, we had the youngest squad in the Premier League. He had experience, won the Bundesliga with the youngest squad in the league. Then they got even younger and he won it again. Style of football, we thought our squad was really well suited to Jurgen's style of play as well. So data can never say this manager's going to succeed at this club or this manager's going to fail at this club. But all the evidence we had pointed in the right direction, certainly. I'd been working part-time for Tottenham Hotspur since 2007. That's where I met Damien Comolli and Michael Edwards. I think at the time, the company I worked for was the only one seriously doing data analysis. So companies like Opta, they kind of report aggregate statistics, but they weren't doing anything predictive. They weren't doing any sort of mathematical modelling to try and understand how the game worked or how you could value a player. So yeah, it was a very small population of people who had any sort of professional experience using data in football. One of Fenway's first moves was to bring in Damien Comolli as director of football. It's very hard, a huge amount of change had to happen at Liverpool. There's only there were many funds to help make that change happen. So very difficult times for Damien. Damien tried to bring my company in back in 2010 to work for Liverpool on the data side, but that was impossible. So finally I joined in 2012, and the mandate was do what we did in baseball, which was, baseball already had the idea of the Oakland A's, a small budget club using data to overperform, and they just applied that to a big budget club. And the idea was the same in football. Much less proven in football. The data quality wasn't really good enough at the time to really tell you how good players were, but it sort of allowed you to vastly expand your horizons for scouting. It gave you a benchmark, it gave you some evidence for and against signing different players, which no other club was using at the time.
We now talk about data like it's almost always been there, which has been there, involved in football for a long time. But particularly at Liverpool, a football club where, the sort of the decision of the manager, the cult of the manager existed through Bill Shankly, had a really strong traditional scouting network that sort of operated in a very simplified way. I remember when you guys sort of the noises around the club started to change and FSG wanted to sort of introduce data. There was a lot of skepticism, I would say certainly amongst the fan base. I just wondered how, you guys responded to that, really, because there was a lot of talk about it externally. I'd imagine culturally inside the club, it takes a lot for people to get used to this sort of new world. And I just think for Liverpool to now be thought of as the leaders in this world, when I would argue it was probably one of the hardest places to implement that cultural change. I just wonder what it was like for you guys at the beginning, going back to 2012 and the first few years when it was quite rocky, really, until it sort of, bit by bit, it began to make a lot more sense, really. And what do you think the trigger point was for that change?
Yeah, I think forget data, just think about other, higher, nothing's higher than data, but think about higher level things like director of football. It just can't work in England. We heard that many, many times when Damien left Spurs. Everyone said, you see, it can't work in English football. When he left Liverpool, it can't work in English football. So what we're talking about is really the sort of, as more money came into the sport, clubs needed to get bigger and more professional. Back in the days of Shankly and Paisley, the football club was of a size that you could control everything because it was a couple of signings a year. The squad was small. You had the doctor and the chief scout and the director, the board, and that was probably it. They're sort of hundreds of £1 million revenue businesses now with sophisticated owners who demand to see, what the process that has gone into making these decisions was. So using data to help that is just part of that growing pains of professionalisation. It's not to say that people that worked in football before weren't professional, but it's just, the job was coaching. It was a much smaller world. So data was certainly one of the things it was easy to criticise about the football world becoming more professional. So I joined the club like a few weeks before Brendan Rodgers became manager, and part of our professionalisation was we're going to have a director of football. And Brendan certainly pushed back against that. You know, it seems silly looking at it 15 years later, but at the time it was absolutely what everyone did. And I can imagine, you know, if you'd asked other managers, would you work under a director of football? They'd all say no. And so that was difficult. We had what we hoped was like a young forward-thinking coach who was much more of the sort of old guard of coach. That made it more difficult internally. In terms of fans and like the outside view, I wouldn't say it wasn't difficult. It was hard to read again and again about what a bunch of idiots we were. But from a professional point of view, we knew the owners always supported us. So no matter how bad things were on the pitch, they see the process. So it's a bit like the swan swimming along. You don't see the legs. They could see the legs swimming underneath. So even though this swan was kind of heading towards a waterfall and sinking and doing all sorts of things, they could see there was some sort of logic and process to what we were doing in the background. I was really lucky to work for Liverpool because most owners don't have that long-term view, don't have that faith. They don't take the evidence and the process into account. They're just as bad as fans are and will make a change based on a few bad results or a few bad pieces in the press. After the first couple of disasters in the early years, we got some evidence from the owners. They're in this for the long term. They believe in what we're doing for the long term.
Ian, I'm gonna talk about where Liverpool go from here in just a second. But before that, let's sort of circle back because Matt, earlier we heard from Peter Moore, who mentioned the phrase "the virtuous cycle." Oh, the virtuous circle, I should say. How much did last summer in particular represent the completion of FSG's principles? You look at yet another Premier League title, revenues are up, then being able to spend record amounts in the transfer window, whilst also, Matt, sticking to PSR limits.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a completion. I think they've been pretty honest and consistent about what they're trying to do for some time. And like I said, it's the same in the US. They want to win. And if they were the owners of my club, that's really what I want to hear. And there's so much evidence that they want to win, right? So there's the obvious stuff you see in the summer or January, particularly the summer though, because they're smart, right? They know that's the better window to buy in. You know, they invest, right? They haven't always invested. Right, and that can be frustrating. I know Liverpool fans have gone, well, why are you buying, people now? Why? But when they go, they really go. You know, Alisson, Van Dijk, and then what we saw this summer. So, commitment to spend. I've already talked about the massive investments they've made in terms of capital infrastructure. So, the stadium, the training ground. They're going kind of world class. They do loads of stuff. And I know this is all the boring bits. The commercial team, the digital strategy, everything about Liverpool just looks professional, like the branding. I know Simon's probably rolling his eyes. I can't see here because he's in a little small screen. But this sort of stuff matters because it enables the club to put money on the pitch, which is what they did this summer. And to go to your point about the virtuous circle, yeah, winning matters. If you believe in FFP, if you believe in PSR, and they do, you have to boost your revenues. You have to win more prize money, go further in the Champions League, ideally make something like the Club World Cup. They didn't make it because of FIFA restricting the number of English teams or a number of teams that any one nation could send to the Club World Cup. That will change, I promise you. If Liverpool are one of our top 2 or 3 clubs, they're going. So that's more money. So that's more reward for playing well. They want to win because they know winning matters. And another one, I just come off the top of my head, I think they took a slightly bold, counterintuitive move when they went with Nike as their shirt deal in 2000. They took less money up front and their deal was incentivized. That says to me, we're backing ourselves. We think we're going to be good, we're going to win, and we're going to sell more shirts, and we're going to get a bigger payment on, units sold. So we don't want the big upfront payment. That to me projects confidence. So, there's your virtue. We want to win. We'll earn more money. We're going to put more money on the pitch.
I'm just wondering what the future holds for FSG at Liverpool. And I think from a data standpoint as well, I'm really fascinated as we're looking at data being more omnipresent in most football teams. And I know you've got your own consultancy and you work with other people as well. I mean, how hard is it to stay ahead of the game right now, especially for a club like Liverpool?
Yeah, it's hard. I started as a one-person data team at Liverpool, and then hired 2 more people in our first sort of few weeks there. We didn't have any office space at Melwood, so we were in the boardroom and got kicked out of the boardroom every time there was a meeting. So that's the level of professionalism I walked into in 2012. When I left, the data team was 7 people. I think they've hired more. I think it's maybe 10 or more than 10 now. Jurgen arriving was the trigger for that, really, because he'll say he's not a data specialist, but he understands what knowing everything that's possible to know can bring, and data is a way to just increase the amount of knowledge you have. So he was the driving force behind us starting to work for the fitness department, start to work with the video department, with the coaches and so on. The new staff at the club have been brought on to do that sort of thing, work with the women's team, work with the academy, which we only did it on a part-time basis when I was there. So when it was my team of 7, I'm sure now with Will Spearman's team of 10, the problem is there's always too many things to do. So as soon as, if you're a data person, you turn up in a club, as soon as you've built something useful, then all of your time's spent maintaining it, having meetings, explaining, interpreting what it is you've built, whether it's for helping with transfers or fitness or whatever. And so a lot of the development work, what is the state of the art? What's the next phase of tracking models? How can we use the sort of more detailed data that's now coming online, where you can see which direction players are looking, if they're making a kick in action and so on. So even at the biggest clubs, there's plenty of work to do, and it's hard because you've got the week-to-week grind of 2 games a week. It's hard to spend time on those longer-term projects. So that's what I'm betting my consultancy on, is that we've got time to spend on this, learning this stuff that if you work at a club, you're frankly too busy to be bothered with.
The competition, it all just increases all the time. So yes, Liverpool have won 2 league titles in the last 5 years. But the challenge of staying at the top isn't going to get any easier. So it'll be interesting to see how they react to the new challenges in football. I'm sure Manchester City will come back. Chelsea are trying to. Arsenal are obviously going to pose a significant challenge on the pitch. We sort of speak about Anfield now as it's a sort of a completed project, but a club with the interest of Liverpool, I think, could be commanding bigger attendances than even the capacity that Anfield has now. So how they deal with that is going to be interesting to follow. Because two of the stands have been redeveloped, as we know, the main stand in the Anfield Road. Can anything be done with the Kop? I'm not sure, because it's on what is quite a busy road. You've got the Kenny Dalglish road stand on the other side where there's very little space. So it's quite interesting that I think I remember when John Henry came in, he said that the Kop was so impressive, and it's like it's the smallest stand now, really, in terms of the height. So there's something there. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they deal with that, because I think that Anfield they could do with a bigger football ground. They could. It's still smaller than Old Trafford. That looks like Arsenal are going to increase their capacity. This all matters, as Matt said. The sort of the circulation of money. But it's whether they want to hang around for that as well. The guys at FSG, John Henry, Tom Werner and Mike Gordon, certainly the first two aren't getting any younger. So it's who inherits the kingdom and whether they want to carry on with it. I'm not saying that I've heard otherwise, but they did ultimately put the club up for sale not so long ago. But I think since then, Liverpool's potential has been sort of realised a little bit more, probably made them appreciate that, well, maybe we can increase the value of this club even further. So there's a lot of room for a lot of things for FSG to continue with. I mean, yes, they won the league, but as all fans want, they want domination, don't they? They don't want to just win the league once every 5 years. They want to win the league time and time again, and they were the standards that that Liverpool set back in the 70s and 80s. So the challenge of running Liverpool, I would say, does not get any easier. And just because they've spent big this summer, I don't think it just means that everybody, certainly I could never imagine FSG, the fans are going to start singing songs about FSG on the terraces, put it that way. They are there. The rules of engagement are very clear. They're there to try and increase the value of the club and knock everything along to make it possible for the team to compete on the pitch. But they're ultimately there for a reason. It's not for an emotional attachment because of Liverpool. So I still think that there's a lot to achieve there for them. And it's going to be an interesting couple of years ahead because this team that they've built over the summer, I think, is being designed really for next season in mind, and then after that. But it's whether people are going to be patient for it. Again, we talk about patience a lot earlier on the podcast.
Matt, patience. Do Liverpool fans have patience, but also marrying that kind of like locality and, dare I say it, the word superclub.
Yeah. I think the thing that intrigues me is what is Fenway Sports Group? They're often talked about as private equity guys, and I think they are individually, but is that what Fenway Sports Group is? Because if it is, you normally hold on to your assets for sort of 5 to 10 years. No, it's not permanent, right? You grow them, you make them run better, and then you sell them. And yet, if you look at the owners, the traditional owners of North American sports franchises, they don't sell; they hold on. They sell bits, and that's how they realise their money. But it's a generational event to sell an NFL team, to sell a Major League Baseball team, and Fenway Sports Group, the guys, they came together 20 odd years ago to buy the Boston Red Sox. They bought some NASCAR. They bought, they did all the normal things. They bought a little kind of local media empire, and they've invested some money in golf. And then they bought Liverpool, and they're holding on. They've sold bits of Fenway. So they invited Redbird Capital in, I think in 2021. They, again, a little bit under the radar, when the Glazers did their strategic alternative, i.e. put Man United up for sale, Liverpool did it in a kind of more subtle way. And then we found out, in an orderly fashion, they'd sold a slither. We don't actually know how much, but they'd sold a small stake to Dynasty Equity or Dynasty Capital, was it? Dynasty Equity, I can't remember now. A small private equity firm that had never really done anything like this before. And then we're sort of told, no, that's it. We're happy. We're happy with the structure. We've extracted some money. We're going to sit tight. And that's what it looks like. And yet, the one, again, I'm sort of going backwards and forwards a little bit here in trying to work out what they are. They bought the Pittsburgh Penguins, National Hockey League team, in 2021. Good purchase. I think it was about $650 million. They're going to sell them. They're selling one of their big teams for a big profit. I think they're going to double their money. Now, that has proven that they do sometimes behave like private equity. They do sometimes buy things, wait for the asset to appreciate and sell it. Now, why? Why have they chosen to do that with Pittsburgh? Maybe it's because they sort of thought, well, it's harder to win in the NHL than we thought. We haven't enjoyed it as much. Some people are speculating it's really to put. They can't wait for an NBA expansion team, and they're going to go big on NBA. We know that LeBron James is part of the ownership group at Fenway. So, look, I don't know, but when I look at how they're running Liverpool, they appear to be in it for the long haul.
Fantastic. Well, let's leave it there, gents. Really appreciate that chat, and let's see where it all goes for FSG at Liverpool. Matt, thanks for your time. Simon, and also Ian, thanks for joining us as well. And also, we hope you've enjoyed the show. Drop us a like on the video, and also leave us a comment if you haven't already. We'll catch you next time. For more from the Athletic FC podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got top journalists like David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the entire season. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Athletic FC. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts from.